Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. Today we're talking about bait casting reels and backlash. Man, if you've ever used a bait casting reel, you have had at least one backlash, if not several. And we all know how frustrating it is when you have those out on the water. It really takes the fun out of fishing. But if you understand what a backlash really is and the factors that contribute to them happening, you can dramatically decrease the likelihood of them happening to you while out on the water. So I'm not going to waste any time here and I'm going to jump right in. Here's the factors that contribute to backlash. First and foremost, your reel may not be tuned properly. It is huge. It's the biggest factor as to whether or not your reel is going to have issues or you're going to have issues casting the reel. I've made a video. You can see it on my page. I'll try to tag it or link it in the description of 3 different ways to properly tune a bait casting reel. So check that out. You really only need to start out with to know one, but you got to know it good. You've got to get it down. The next factor that comes into play when it comes to having issues with bait casting reels is thumb control or bad thumb control. If your timing is poor with your thumb on the releasing of the spool at the first part of the cast and stopping the spool at the end of the cast, you're going to have issues. So you're going to have to practice. That's how you get good at thumb timing. You practice. That's all it is practice. So get the reps in. The next factor, or really factors, we'll use an umbrella statement here. Conditions. So when you initially tune in your bait casting reel, say you tune it in at 7 o'clock in the morning, there's no wind, you're using a certain lure, XYZ lure, and you set it to casting medium effort. So not a real hard cast. Well, say 3 hours later, the wind starts blowing, you changed lures to a lighter lure, and you're starting to throw harder. So a few conditions changed, which is going to change the speed of the spool in relation to what the bait is doing. And look, that's what a backlash is to begin with. The speed of the spool is going too fast in relation to what the lure is doing, which causes coils to come up, and if not properly dealt with or feathered out with your thumb, you're going to have a backlash. I showed the feathering method in the tuning video as well. So you've got several conditions that can come into play. You've got the amount of energy that you put into the cast. You've got the smoothness or maybe how erratic you are with your cast. You're inconsistent, basically. The style of your cast. You say you change up the style of your cast, which could potentially, most likely, would change the speed of the spool. And there's other ones, environmental factors like the wind is the biggest one because that changes the speed of the lure in the air if it's blowing in your face and from behind, but that works in your favor. And then also there's factors like lure aerodynamics. So wind and lure aerodynamics basically have the same impact on a lure. What happens is when you throw a lure into the wind, initially the lure is going really fast when it leaves the tip of your rod. Well, once it gets out into the wind a little bit, it starts to slow down as a result of the wind pushing against it, causing drag, causing slack in the line. The lure is no longer pulling line off the spool, but the spool is still spinning at the same rate in which it was when the lure was moving at its fastest at the first part of the cast when it left the tip of the rod. So that can cause coils to come up. If not properly dealt with, you'll have a backlash. The aerodynamics of a lure basically does the exact same thing. An aerodynamic lure, pretty much for the most part, will maintain the exact same amount of speed throughout a cast. Even in the wind, a lot of aerodynamic lures, if they're heavy enough, will not have an issue in the wind. Well, a lure that's not aerodynamic causes drag, so it leaves the tip of the rod going really fast, gets out in front of you a good ways. The lure starts causing drag, or drag, the situation ends up being the same as if the wind pushed it, and that they're slacking the line. The spool is still spinning at a really fast rate, and coils will start coming up. You got to feather them out, or you're going to have a backlash. So those are things you got to pay attention. The lure aerodynamics is one that catch a lot of people off guard. So aerodynamic lures examples would be top waters that are very symmetrical in shape, that are fairly heavy. not aerodynamic lure, a wacky rig Senko worm, or a spinner bait. So just kind of take into consideration when you tie on a new lure, how aerodynamic is it. So this next whole I'm going to use another umbrella term, gear. If your gear is not compatible with one another, you're going to have issues making good casts. What I mean by that is your lure needs to match the specifications on both the rod and the reel, the weight specifications. They both have it. It's written on the rod, not on the reel. You'll probably have to Google that or look in the instructions. And then the line comes into play in that if you got to have the right line that is recommended for both the rod and the reel, because the right size will go through the guides as it should without causing too much or too little friction, and it'll maintain the correct speed. And same with the reel, the right or wrong size line will impact whether or not it is correctly or incorrectly coming off of the spool. That's a big one. Also, when it comes to line, you have to have the perfect amount of perfect as you can get it amount of line on the spool, because if you put too much, it's going to want to jump off the spool and cause issues with your line tangling, backlash. If you don't have enough line on there, you're going to have it probably affect your timing a little bit, and then also you're not going to get as much out of your casts. So line lure needs to be compatible with manufacturer specifications for the rod and the reel, and you got to have the right amount of line on the reel. So, say you got all that right, everything is good, you're dialed in. Oh, and as far as the rod goes, the weight matters, because when you're casting a rod and you've got a lure on there, you're putting energy and you've got the weight of the lure into the rod. And so, you know, a rod that is properly weighted when you cast it is going to have more control, more accuracy, and more forgiveness. When you're on the heavy end and the lure is too heavy, you lose control, accuracy, forgiveness, and if it's really heavy, you run the risk of breaking your rod. On the light end, and look, generally speaking, we know that throwing a lighter lure with a bait casting reel is really hard to do. It's just trickier because there's so much less room for error. So even if a light lure is within the rod's recommended weight range, you may not want to throw it, because the cast has to be so much better as far as the movement has to be so much smoother. You can't have any jerky movement throughout the cast. So all that is you're good. You've checked it out. You've double checked it. You get out on the water. You watch my tuning video. So now you know how to tune at least one or two, if not three ways. Um, and you know how to thumb coils out of your spool, and you practice your thumb timing. So you got your bases covered pretty much. The only thing left is conditions. When you get out on the water and you tune your reel, you've got to be looking out for changing conditions as you fish. A lot of times you can catch them before they even become an issue. Sometimes you might have to get a few coils showing up to realize, like, oh, hey, the wind started blowing. I need to tune my reel a little bit. Or you might have to get a backlash to realize, dang, man, I just tried to cast way too hard, but my rod or my reel was not set up for that, because it's still set up for how I told it I wanted to fish 3 hours ago. So again, get your gear right at home before you get out on the water. Make sure I use a digital kitchen scale. I don't weigh baits anymore, but if I introduce something new, I always try to make sure that it's within the weight range for whatever rod I'm trying to use it on. Try to get your gear dialed in as best as you can. Make sure you know how to tune. Go out and practice your thumb timing. And then when you're fishing, you're good. You're good. You're looking for the conditions that change, your effort, right? Your consistency, the shape of your lure. Is it aerodynamic or not? Right? Is the wind blowing now or not? So these are the things that we need to pay attention to. And as long as we do, we're going to be way more equipped. I'm not going to sit here and say you're not going to get backlashes anymore. But I will sit here and say if you watch this video at least one more time, or just paid attention the first time you watched it, and pay attention to these things, the likelihood of you getting a backlash is going to dramatically go down, and the ones that you do get are going to be a lot less severe. So guys, I hope this has been helpful to you. This is my 33rd consecutive year of using a bait casting reel primarily, and I just squeezed it into 10 minutes. So hope you enjoy. If you like this video, give me a like. Subscribe if you want to. I'll be putting out more content like this. In the meantime, y'all be safe on the water. Peace.